Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Orangebloods YouTube channel TV. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined by Anwar Richardson. Do us a favor, hit the subscribe button if you so choose to. It would help us out, as do the likes. Likes and subscribes, we love both of those. Part of our conversation today, Anwar, centers on something that's almost impossible in nature to talk about with a straight face. Underrated players in the Texas football program. This is a program that largely deals with the opposite. It's a fan base that overextends the value of its own players. It thinks that everybody can be drafted. It oftentimes is a hard school to do an underrated list on, because every year this fan base has the program at 10-2 as a floor. That's the floor. Can't be worse than 10-2. Have you seen the schedule? And then every year it's like 8-4, maybe 9-3. You know, Tom Herman gets fired when his team finishes inside the top 20, and probably justifiably so. But, you know, these are teams that are constantly underperforming, which makes putting together a list of the top 3 underrated players on the roster potentially a difficult task. And yet I didn't have a hard time coming up with 3 names. How about you?
It was more for me narrowing it down, right? So it was kind of like, where did I want to go? Because I didn't want to be Captain Obvious, right? And go with certain ones, but I also wanted to make sure it was. So for my list, I'm really excited about my list because I feel like I go inside the box, outside the box, back inside the box for my guys. So
let's do this. How many of the 3, because we don't know who each of us have selected. How many of the 3 do you think we both have on the same list?
1, potentially.
I thought 1 for sure. I'm thinking 2 now.
I don't think 2. I think there's only going to be 1 guy that we're going to have on the list. So here's the deal. How are we going to do it? Am I going to go through my list? Are you going to go 3? I'm going
to let you go first. So okay. We're going to go in descending order here.
Okay.
And I'll do a big introduction here for you. With his 3rd spot in his top 3 most underrated players on the Texas roster, Anwar selects
Jared Wiley, tight end, out of, where's he out of? I don't know. Temple, Texas. Here's why I'm going with Jared. That's the only one I thought you may potentially have on your list. But here it is, because I looked it up, and look, I understand that Cade Brewer is the guy. I understand that Cade Brewer is the guy that is, can run block, does pass block, is also, is active in the passing game. But I went back and I looked it up, Catch. He had 9 receptions for 166 yards, but the key number to this, Catch, he averaged 18.4 yards a catch last season from the tight end position. So then again, I went and looked it up a little bit more. And I wanted to see, okay, well, where would that rank on the team as far as that? Now, I think Calvante Dixon only appeared in 3 games. So I said, okay, let's have some sort of cutoff here. And so I went with 8 games or more. Tariq Black, ironically, I should have asked you this. Tariq Black actually led the team in yards per catch at 24 yards. It was 10 for 240 and a touchdown. The second guy on the team, though, was Wiley at 18.4. Now, for me, this guy is a playmaker, right? He's a guy that Tom Herman previously said. Remember when I did my unsolicited, I think it was my jam with him when I had he unsolicited, it was like Jared Wiley is a future NFL player. And Catch, every time we saw him last year, all the guy did was make plays. All he did was make one great catch after another. So I'm a huge Jared Wiley guy. That guy, I believe, is the most talented pass catcher that's on the roster at this moment. Now, he needs to improve in the blocking scheme. We saw that obviously in the spring game. But Jared Wiley, for me, he starts off on my list at number 3.
I got to be honest. I don't have any offensive players on my list at all. And I went down every name on the offensive list and didn't think that anybody qualified. Now, I'm with you on Wiley. My thought on Wiley is that he's not underranked, but he might be slightly overranked at this point, only because I'm waiting for him to knock the door down and be that guy at the tight end position. It hasn't happened yet. And even through the spring, I wouldn't, as much as we talk about, the tight end position and its purpose in this offense, it's still kind of a gang of guys. He hasn't completely cemented himself as the number one tight end I think you and I think of him as the number one tight end on this roster. But I think there are two coaching staffs that aren't quite sold yet on him being that guy. And so I think I agree with Tom Herman. I think Jared Wiley will play on Sundays. I just don't know that I would put him in the underrated category because I'm still waiting for him to consistently be the guy that you and I talk about him being. And I was kind of disappointed not to hear his name more this spring. So
now here's the thing. I do agree. There needs to be more. And that's why I put him, he's underrated, because I do believe it's there. Like, I think if we look at all the tight ends in the roster, there's only one that we believe will play on Sundays. That's it. At this moment, right? I'm not saying someone may not develop, but right now, that's the guy. Like, that's the guy you look at and say, 2 years from now, he could be a draft pick. Like, very easily is the guy that he should be 2 years from now or so. He should be a guy that we look at and say he's the best tight end in the Big 12. So, and that's why I say it's underrated. I get what you're saying. What you're saying is he hasn't done enough to be rated at this moment. But I'm saying, to me, he's a guy that if it clicks for him this year and he makes that leap, makes that jump, I think he's a guy that we look at and he's a playmaker. And I think he's important too, because when you start thinking of, I'll let you jump in a second. When you start thinking of young quarterbacks always need their tight ends. They need the safety valve. They need the guys for the check down. And that's why I think a guy like Wiley becomes important.
I think we're on the same page with Wiley. I really do. I would only say I think you and I have him overrated until he starts to do the thing that we're thinking he can do, at which point we go from being wrong to right. But until that starts to happen, I feel like he is in the light switch hasn't flipped on yet. And I can't definitively say it happens this year. I think it's going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And I wouldn't say that I'm selling my Jared Wiley stock. I think I'm holding it. Yeah. I think I need to see a little bit more from him. And then I'll be in the category of, hey, I hyped him up a lot. I've slowed down a little lately, mainly because I really expected at the beginning of April that he would be a name at the end of April that everybody would be talking about. And it hasn't happened yet. And I feel like it's left the door open for Jatavian Sanders to potentially come in the fall and just blow everybody out of the water. If those guys aren't careful, they're going to let the 5-star come in and get a chance at that position. And I don't think any of those dudes are more talented.
Stop talking. You just went into my number 2. You just went into my number 2.
All right, well, hold on. Let me do number 3.
Okay, all right.
I will say that before you get to your number 2, I did not take incoming prospects into the program into consideration. My number 3 guy is Dicker the kicker.
Oh!
It's not that I think he's the best kicker in the Big 12.
Yeah.
But I also don't hear Texas fans talking about him in that capacity. I feel like coming out of his freshman year, there was a lot of hype, a lot of talk. I think he might have made an occasional Big 12 team a year ago. Someone mentioned him over the weekend as second team all Big 12. I don't remember that, which may be why he's underrated, because it could have been that he had that good of a season and I just don't remember it that way. Look, he was 71% on his field goals a year ago, and that's just okay. So if we were just talking about him as a place kicker, we might be talking about a guy that hasn't taken the step forward as an older player from the younger player, the way you typically would think a guy that played a lot as a freshman, by the time he's an upperclassman, you would be able to statistically see improvement. That he came in last season, though, when the team was in a real punch, when Ryan Bushevsky gets hurt, and that he came in and was able to, from an average standpoint, I don't know that the number of balls that he had fair caught or the number of balls inside the 20 on a percentage standpoint quite held up to Bushevsky, but from an average per kick standpoint, he matched him. He actually, if I'm not mistaken, might have been like 0.3 higher, like 43.6 instead of 43.3 from an average punt perspective. If you're telling me that a guy's handling your punting and your place kicking, and he's at least adequate at both, now we're talking about a really valuable player, really and truly, because some teams don't have one of either. To have a guy that in a pinch can do everything you need him to do in the kicking game is the kind of guy that I think this program will miss when he's gone. And again, I didn't see an offensive player on the roster that I was ready to say is underrated. So I looked at defense and I looked at special teams, and I think there are a lot of guys on defense that qualify as potentially underrated. But for instance, David Benda could have made my list and was on it, and I decided, no, I'm going to be creative. I'm going to put Cameron Dicker on this. But I think there's a lot of guys on defense, but I wanted to give Dicker a little bit of love because I think last season was so bad on War that I think people have forgotten that at the end of the year, he was doing everything, and he was doing an admirable job in taking on every single kicking responsibility inside the program, to the point that if he punted this year, if they said we kind of like Dicker doing both, I would totally get it based off of what happened last year down the stretch when he did both.
All right, so let's do this. Let's call an audible right now.
Okay.
Let me go 2 and 1.
Oh, and wow.
Let's go 2 and 1, because right now this is going to make the flow go well.
Fair enough.
Okay. So I'm going to go because I have Dicker on my list. And so
I was worried about that.
Yes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish up mine and then just finish up yours. So this way, because I'll have nothing left to say if you keep going at this rate. You're taking all my guys off the board. So
I only took one.
You touched on the second one. So my second one, number 2, was Jatavian Sanders. And I was thinking outside of the box as far as Jatavian is concerned, but he's a guy that you alluded to. He's a guy that I catch will come in from Denton Ryan, and he's a guy that, whether it's playing tight end or whether they want to put him on defense, whatever they feel like the need is, I think he's a guy that comes in that no one's talking about, and rightfully so, because he's not on campus. I think Jatavian comes in, and I think he hits the ground running. I think he's a guy that is just a bona fide stud at whatever position that you want to put him in. Now, let me go ahead and put in my readers, because obviously I can't see without him, right? But for those who are unfamiliar with him, Jatavian Sanders, 5-star for Rivals, correct, Catch?
Yes.
6'4", 220, listed as an athlete, okay? Last season, 63 receptions, 1,161 yards. It's at the tight end position, 16 touchdowns. He also on defense, he had 4 sacks and an interception on defense as a senior. That defense only allowed 15.8 points a game. And according to the bio, including 7 games of 10 points or less. And he posted 5 100-yard receiving games last season. And they did beat down our Cedar Park Wolves in the state championship game, 59-14, before they knew what hit them. This guy, you owe it to yourself. He's a stud. Catch, I don't know what you would compare him to. You would have to think of a guy who's been that athletic on both sides of the ball. But, I mean, this is a guy, if you see his highlights, one-handed catch after one-handed catch, defensive monster. He's a guy that no one's talking to, but I think by the time training camp comes around, I think he's a guy that's all we end up talking about, and all we end up hearing is about how good Jatavian Sanders is on whatever side of the ball they want to put him on.
Again, I'm vibing with you on Jatavian Sanders. I don't disagree with any of that. I think from my perspective, I merely look at him as, when you're a 5-star recruit at the University of Texas, he could lead all of the tight ends in receptions, let's say with 25 this year. Let's say he goes 25 for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. That would probably be the greatest tight end season in the history of freshman tight ends at the University of Texas statistically. And I think people would go, oh, I was expecting a little bit more than 4 touchdowns. I think that his rating makes him a guy that's almost impossible to underrate at this point, just because for most Texas fans that aren't on Orangebloods every single day, and by the way, this would be a good time for me to remind everybody, you can join Orangebloods right now. We've got a special free trial. Anwar will pop it up here on the screen throughout the video. You can sign up all the way through August 31st. If we can't prove to you over the course of 4 or 5 months that you should stay on Orangebloods, and we don't deserve to keep you, but we think this special free trial that we will offer will do exactly that you'll realize by the end of it, oh, this is absolutely worth my time and money. I think most people know that name. I think Jatavian Sanders is the name when the stadium, when DKR fills up for the first time. And are we assuming, I'm assuming a full house.
Full house.
I do not anticipate 75. They're going to sell it out.
Yes.
And when that happens,
you watched the Canelo fight on Saturday, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I didn't, but I saw it. Yeah.
It was elbow to elbow. It was back in the good old days. I was like, oh, we're done with social distancing. I get it. So yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen in other states, but there will be 100,000 people in the stadium.
Correct.
Opens up against Louisiana.
May not be in California.
I have no idea.
That may not be in California, but I know what we're going to be doing here in Texas and in Florida.
There's no way. I don't even want to think about like the city of Austin trying to block UT from having a full house when Dallas is doing it.
They'll stuff Adler in one of those homeless tents if he tries to F around over there. He needs to pick some
battles, and one of the battles he should be picking right now is, I can't tell you what happens with the homeless between now and August, but we plan on having 100,000 people in the stadium.
People might actually like him if he actually said that.
Oh,
maybe.
So when the 100,000 people go into DKR for the first game of the season against Louisiana, there will be a rush of this. There will be a buzz inside the stadium when Jatavian Sanders goes on the field for the first time. And in a world where you're like, I think he's even better than people think he is, then he could be on the underrated list and you could absolutely qualify him. In my mind, he's one of the top 20 prospects in the country as a true freshman coming in. He has a chance to make an like best freshman in the Big 12 type of impact. So, I'm worried that I'm overcooking the grits a little bit because, in my world, he may be freshman of the year on the offensive side of the ball in the Big 12. And maybe he doesn't do that and he still has a really good freshman season. I think all of those dudes in the tight end room, to your point, including Jared Wiley, are leaving the door too open for help.
Yeah. I mean, he's a guy that when I start thinking about it, Ketch, I mean, when you talk about 5 stars who come in and hit the ground running, maybe Kaden Stearns did as a freshman a little bit. He had a couple of games where it was like, you remember the Wolf of DKR, and then it kind of like it leveled out a little bit. Malik, not so much. He played, but the team really wasn't that good. And I'm starting. And if you go,
look at Desean last year.
Yeah, and Bijan, even in that, and now again, that was only glimpses, towards the end of the year, but the overall body, not so much. I mean, so I'm thinking he comes in as a 5-star, but I'm thinking from start to finish, he's a stud. That's what I think. Like, I'm not, and again, they may be overcooking it a little bit, but I just believe in what he has from a talent perspective. I do believe, to your point, the door is open in that tight end room. And now, listen, I understand that in here, especially they're going to run a lot of 12 personnel. So if they're running a lot of 12 personnel, that gives the opportunity for the tight end to get on the field. Now, I don't know where he is from the blocking schemes and being able to pick those things up. And that's going to be super important for him to get on the field. But if he can pick it up as a run blocker, pass blocker, he's a stud. He's a gift that Sarkisian can say, thank you, Tom, for leaving that with us. This is a toy we can definitely play with. So I have him as number 2. And then just because my number 1 guy, who was your number 3 guy, was Dicker. But it was mainly for the punting aspect more so than the kicking aspect. Because I agree with you. College kickers are so unpredictable. I feel like it's a 50-50 from any distance. I feel like even extra points. Like we covered a Cal game, Catch, where all you need is an extra point to go into overtime, and you couldn't make that.
Bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, but kickers are so unpredictable. The one thing you'll see, if you follow me on Twitter, and hopefully you do this year, it's Anwar Richardson, just my first name and my last name. That's it. If you follow me on Twitter, the one thing you'll see me every weekend, I'll just say one word: kickers. Because they just miss. They just missed. They're really inconsistent. So yeah, he may have made a 58-yarder in the spring game, but when it comes to making a 35-yarder, 37-yarder, I'm like, coin toss. But I did look up his punting stuff though, and that was what was really really impressive. And so he kicked in all these games. And let's say you recorded 61 touchbacks on 73 kickoffs, punted 8 times. He averaged 43.6 yards. 7 of his punts covered at least 40 yards last season, Catch. And they said there was only 1 that was not pinned at the 7-yard line. Overall, Texas, from a punting unit, finished 2nd in the Big 12. So it includes a little bit of Bachesky, but Bachesky also had some shanks that were in there as well. They finished 2nd underneath Texas Tech. So for me, as a punter, just as a straight punter, he's a guy that I think they've got to go into training camp in the fall when Bachesky is healthy. I think they have to literally have a legit battle and see, like, hey, is this the guy that we really need as a punter? We've seen what a Texas team can look like with a really, really good punter, right, Catch? That guy was actually an MVP of a bowl game. Like that's how good a punter can be. So to me, that's why I was like, let me just get through mine and let you get to yours. Dicker is my number 1 as far as the underrated, undervalued category. So then we actually did have one on that. That's not the one I thought we would have. I thought we both might have Wiley, but it ended up being Dicker.
I thought we might have 2 and that Dicker would be the 2nd. I have a guy that's on my list that you may think doesn't qualify as underrated, but he's my number 1 guy. We'll get to him. Number 2, I put Javandre Sweat on my underrated list, mainly because I think if Keandre Coburn got hurt, I think Javandre Sweat was of all the guys who are the backups on this team. I may worry less about him going in to having to fill in for a guy than maybe anybody else on the roster. Like I don't know how much we would notice him, but that's part of what it is that he does. Is he eats up blockers. He allows linebackers to have space, occasionally gets penetration. and occasionally can make a play, but he's a line disruptor. He will never be a household name, I don't think, for the most part. But I think he eventually will have a chance to play on Sundays because guys with his size and athleticism don't grow on trees. And I think right now he's a good player. I think I don't know how much of a really good player he is yet. I can only couch it by saying if anybody on this roster from a starting position got hurt, the player in the backup role that I think would come in and do the best job of completely filling what's missing in losing the guy that's out. Right now, for me, Sweat, while not one of the most talked about guys in the program, I think he falls into that category for me, which absolutely puts him into the heading of an underrated player. Any thoughts on Javandre Sweat, or I can slide right out on?
No. I like it. I was just looking up some of his stats here. So it looks like he's played in 23 games so far. By the way, shout out to him. He made the Big 12 Commissioner's Honor Roll in the spring of 2020. So shout out to that. Shout out to you, Javandre. Last year, though, as a sophomore, he played in 10 games, 22 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1 sack, a pass breakup, quarterback hurry, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery. And as a freshman, he played in 13 games. So you're right. Like he's very productive. And when you start talking about what you're going to do when you go down on the bench, he's a very productive player, a guy we don't talk a lot about. But to your point, let me see what his size is. Yeah, 6'4", 230. At 330, 340. Let me try that one more time.
Big boy.
That's big. 6'4", 340. Like that, yeah. That's major. So yeah, I'm all down with that. That's a good one. That's probably a sneaky good pick. I like it.
Here's my other my number one guy, again, is the guy that I thought both of us would pick. I'm surprised that you didn't pick. It makes me think, like a couple of your guys, that you don't think he qualifies as an underrated player. Deshawn Jameson is my number one pick for most underrated. You look back at his season a year ago, didn't pile up big plays. Okay. Matter of fact, I think he had 1 interception on the season. His statistical breakdown isn't full of memorable plays. I think that might be the last step for a guy who on special teams is a really good return guy, really good. And I don't think on a national and Big 12 level, he gets enough credit for how good he is as a return guy. The combination of his return skills, which I almost have to see him touch the ball 5 or 6 times a game. He will make something happen if he touches the ball in that capacity on a per game basis. As a cornerback, I think he's very close to emerging as an NFL guy. And I think the only thing that's really been missing are the big plays, the pass breakups, the interceptions. And I think that may be what we see this season for him. He may be ready to take that last step. We saw it in the spring game on the last play of the first half when he takes the Casey Thompson ball and goes, almost 100 yards with it for a touchdown. And the most memorable play, I think, of the entire spring game. I think he's on the cusp of being an honorable mention all Big 12 type player to being an all big type player and a guy that at the end of the season, you remember when Charlie showed up and at the end of that first year on the defensive side of the ball, there were a bunch of guys that had been okay up until then. Mikhail Thompson's a perfect example. And by the end of that changeover, that last year, he became a guy that was an NFL drafted player. 3rd round, 4th round, if I'm not mistaken. I think Deshawn Jameson is a guy that looks like a late round guy. But as we talked about in the videos right after the NFL draft, it would not shock me to see him have the kind of season where after this year, he's a 3rd round type of player. He's small and he ain't ever going to get big. But I think that when it's all said and done, he's going to end up being a guy that's played a lot of college football, has started a lot of games. I think he's going to test really well. I think he gives you return value at the next level as well. And if he adds playmaking to his repertoire, which just hasn't completely been there yet on the defensive side of the ball, at least last season, he wasn't a big-time playmaker, then I think we'll look back and say we really liked Deshawn Jameson, but he ended up being even better than we were talking about 6 months before the season started.
So here's the thing. So he did earn Big 12 honorable mention last year as a kick and a punt returner. And he was also the Big 12 special teams player of the year last year. So I feel like how
can it be special teams player of the year if he finished honorable mention?
Look, it said, look, it's the Texas bio. Earned all Big 12 honorable mention as a kick/punt returner, and he was also a Big 12 special teams player of the year. Look, you figure it out. It's the Big 12. So yes, he was honorable mention on the team, but then there's a certain little section in there as well.
I'd be real mad if I was the first team kick returner at that point.
It does. There's a little.
It's like giving Sam the conference player of the year.
It's a little odd.
All right, now I got to look up his bio.
Yeah.
What did you do at that point?
I don't even know what award does he hang up at that point. I guess he just takes Big 12 Special Teams Player of the Year, and he just ignores being a Big 12 on the team. It reminds me of.
But I'm talking specifically about him as a DB more than
it's as a DB, he hasn't gotten all that love. I know you're looking it up now. As a DB, he hasn't gotten all that love, but he, to me, is a guy that I'm starting to believe can emerge into a day 2 pick. Like that. And when I say day 2, I mean second round, third round. He's a guy that I'm looking at now that if he progresses and does what he needs to do, the speed is there. Obviously, I think the coverability is there. I mean, what they do in this offense, and it being attacking offense, is going to give the cornerbacks a lot of chances, a lot of opportunities to make plays because quarterbacks are going to try to get rid of the ball fast. And look, he's got twitch. You know, he's a guy that I think can make the plays on the ball. So. I mean, Deshawn Jameson, when it's all said and done, we may get through 2021, and we might say Deshawn Jameson was the best defensive player on this team. Right? Coburn gets the love. Morrow, has done well. We talk about the Marvion and what he may potentially be, but when it's all said and done, you may look up and say, "That's the guy." Like that's the guy. And we saw him make, an interception, like you said in the spring, and that we end up saying, we might say that's the guy. So I feel, I know we're kind of splitting hairs. I feel like he's gotten some love throughout the year. I mean, what game did he save last year? Was it the Texas Tech game that he had like a punt return in there or kickoff return and returned it for a touchdown? Like there was a lot of crazy things that happened, and maybe it was Texas Tech or maybe it was Oklahoma. He had a lot of. He's always known for having big plays.
Well, wasn't it the TCU game where he returned the opening kickoff and the announcers thought it was Bijan Robinson?
Well, that happened, but
the week after the neck injury.
Yes, but I feel like there was like a Tech game because there was a lot of special teams craziness that happened in that game. And again, I just got to go back and look through the box score. But that being said, I mean, I have no problems with it because he's not a guy that we looked at. I mean, he's not a guy that we've interviewed. I don't, really remember interviewing a lot. I don't know if we interviewed him. Maybe we did. I feel like we did interview him though. I'm going to look through here. I'm going to look through my notes.
So can I tell you, first of all,
go ahead.
I think I'm looking at Deshawn Jameson's bio on the Texas website. I think they made a mistake. I think someone was smoking crack. I understand where I think they made the mistake. On the official All Big 12 team, and look, maybe like the Temple newspaper named him the Big 12 Player of the Year, and they're just not announcing it. Last year's Special Teams Player of the Year in the Big 12 was Treston Ebner from Baylor.
Okay.
But what's funny about this is, and he's listed as a kick returner and a punt returner. What's interesting is that he was second team all Big 12 at kick returner and punt returner behind Phillip Brooks of Kansas State, so the way this had to have gone down was Phillip Brooks received more votes for kick returner, but Treston Ebner from Baylor received more votes for player of the year. Now, what it does say at the bottom is that Deshawn Jameson received at least one vote for special teams player of the year, but he was only honorable mention. But I have to admit, it's given what I'm looking at on the actual Big 12 website. Hey, if the second team guy is going to outpoint the first team guy, then why wouldn't the honorable mention guy potentially outpoint both of them?
So two things. We did speak to Deshawn Jameson back in April 20th. Second thing, what you're talking about reminds me of when you covered like high school sports like years ago, and they would come up with the all county teams, and you ever had like those meetings where like the high school writers are trying to figure it out, and it's just like you're like, okay, well, he can't make the first team, so let's give him offensive MVP, right? And so you start making up these little categories to make sure you get everyone covered, because you don't want parents calling and complaining. And that, by the way, that happened a lot back in the day. I don't know how they're doing it now. I don't even know how many high school writers it has. Like one guy, poor guy, has to make an all-county team. There's like 800 schools. But back in the day, it would literally be making up, okay, well, he's not first team, but he could be an offensive MVP, or he's not a second, he could be the defensive MVP team, and all these other type of awards. You know, maybe it's like Big 12 newcomer of the year. Let's just throw them on there. You know, it's really
You know who I did that once with, Anwar?
Who's that?
Drew Brees. When Drew Brees was a junior, we were putting together our KI-42 all Central Texas football team. Mm-hmm. And I remember calling his coach, Ron Schrader, and I was like, Coach, putting together an all Centex team, wanted to get your nominations both for your team, and we were talking about it. And at the time, there was a kid at Thorndale who was like the class 2A player of the year. And we were going to pick the guy that had Thorndale as the number one team in that classification. Number one, he was the state player of the year. And I get Schrader on the phone, and he's like, here's what I'm going to tell you right now. If you don't put Drew Brees on that team as the quarterback, the whole team is shit. It's worthless. Mm-hmm. Either Drew Brees is on that team or that team's not any good. So at the time, it was like, oh crap, we've already picked our quarterback and it's not Drew Brees, but maybe Ron Schrader is saying something that we need to pay attention to. So you know what we did?
What'd you do?
We made Drew Brees our newcomer of the year and had the first team quarterback spot go to somebody else. And then the next year, Drew Brees was player of the year and first team quarterback.
So every high school writer does this. We have all skirted this thing back in the day. And there's people watching this video who are like, what the hell? They're going to go back, Ketch, and look at their clippings of stuff from when they played in high school. Like, wait a second. How was that? Yeah. Oh, and you should see the honorable mentions, how some of that just gets tossed around. But yes, yeah. That's what it sounds like when I hear the Big 12. It reminds me of being a high school writer many moons ago. And again, I remember one time, just going through stories, all the high school writers in Tampa would vote, and it would be like a point system. And one person decided that to juke the system. Like there was one guy, there was like two people who were battling back and forth. One guy who should have won is that guy named Jared Faison, went to University of Florida, a good quarterback in the Tampa area. I think he also went and played receiver. Anyway, what the person did was put them like that Jared Faison dead last in order to throw off the point total. And eventually that person got exposed because the coach basically was like, how is this possible that my guy didn't get it? And they went and found the votes and realized that this person tried to juke the system, and she ended up getting fired.
One last thing on Deshawn. I don't think it's widely known that he set the school record last year with 31.7 yards per return on kickoffs, and that his 564 total yards were the third most in school history. And that's, if we were just talking about him as a special teams player at this point, I think you'd probably have to call him underrated, because I don't think Texas fans are like, I dare you to kick the ball to Deshawn Jameson. That's kind of how I feel, but his numbers actually suggest a prowess as a player in that area that very few other players on this roster have about their own domains. I'm suggesting that on defense, he takes a step towards that. But it is interesting. I had forgotten 31.7 per kick is ridiculously good over the course of a season. And I don't know that we talk about him in the return game. When the every time there's an elite guy that's a return guy in the NFL, there's like a certain amount of cachet that comes with that. Everybody knows, don't kick the ball to Devin Hester, right? It's almost a story within the story. Deshawn Jameson as a return guy isn't far from that. And they've got to figure out a way to get that guy returning kicks on punts, if at all possible, unless he's just terrible at it. They've got a bona fide school record breaker as a return guy. I think you got to try. Like I said, for me, he's a guy that one way or the other, I want touching the ball 5 or 6 times a game, because you can't tell me with 5 or 6 touches that he won't do something with at least one of those touches that changes a game, that gives Texas a short field or even better. And yeah, I think in retrospect, if we were to do like a draft of Longhorn players on this year's team, Bijan goes first. I don't know where Deshawn goes, but I'm not making a couple of picks before he's off the board. I want a guy that I think I place a really high value on, an elite level return guy who I think has the skills to, when this season's over with, be a 3rd round type of pick as a DB, maybe a 4th round, only because of his size. When this season's over with, we'll be talking about a guy with, as long as he stays healthy, with over 30 career starts as a DB in the Big 12. Those guys typically play a lot of games in the NFL when they move along. There's a lot of, I think, value on guys with that much experience against teams that do nothing but throw the ball. Yeah, I may become president of the Deshawn Jameson fan club before this season begins.
Yeah, I think you should do it now. Start the website now, because by the time the season rolls around, he's a guy that, to your point, I think can make plays. Like you said, you can't underestimate the value of special teams and what that can do as far as field position is concerned, what he can do and evolve into as a cornerback. I mean, yeah, the best may be yet to come as far as he's concerned. Like, I'm totally into that. And by the way, you came with a great idea, which is one of our, for a future video, we got to do a draft. You want to do maybe 7 rounds and go, toe to toe. Just not have to do 10 or 15, but maybe at 7 rounds. And I'd be curious with that draft if there would be a quarterback taken within the first 14 picks or not.
Well, that may be an item where we get Jason, Dustin, Alex in some capacity and make it more than 2 teams.
Yeah.
I'm taking Hudson Card early, just so you know.
Sure, yeah.
I'm Jerry Jones with like Kyle Pitts. I'm just, and honestly, it's about me juggling all of the fan clubs that I'm the president of. That's the only thing keeping me back from being the Deshawn Jameson president of the fan club is, do I have time to be the fan club president for him and Hudson Card?
A lot of responsibilities.
It is a lot of responsibilities. I just moved. I haven't fully unpacked. Like, I don't know that I need that much responsibility, but in this exercise that we will do, I think the question is, who goes off the board first, Hudson Card or Casey Thompson? I don't know that it's a question of will Hudson Card stick around beyond pick 14. There's not 7 players on this team that I would pick over him. So if it was just me and you, and we were 7 picks each deep, he would be off the board by then for me. Hell, I might have drafted Casey Thompson too. Like, you know, there's a world where I just take both quarterbacks, and then whichever one emerges potentially as an all Big 12 type of player, no matter where you drafted them, if you didn't draft them first, it looks like you got great value on your pick. So I think you can make a case. Anyway, that's for another project for another day.
We'll do that.
As it is, thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button, if at all possible. Hit the like button too. Again, we like both of those things. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next video. Later.